All right, well, hi everyone, and thank you for the award. I'm just honored to be in that inaugural class and very excited to talk about financing of the clean energy economy, which of course has evolved over the years. When we got started 15 years or so ago, we were kind of groveling for every centime we could find, and now the good news is there's the traditional VC, project finance, IPOs, and yet there's so much more than that. There's the public sector, there are municipal bonds, and so we're going to dig into all of that, and we have a fantastic panel here today. And rather than introduce my panel, I'm just going to ask you each a question. You can spend the first 30 seconds kind of giving us your who you are and what you're doing, and then we'll just launch into, because there's a lot to cover in 20 minutes that we have. So first, Kathy Zoy, obviously a veteran in the sector from starting in the public sector at the DOE as a leader there many years ago, and now you've ended up at EVgo, which is fantastic, as the CEO. So just tell us a little bit about, and EVgo is different because it started as a division of NRG and then was spun out, which is kind of unusual. So tell us just a little bit about how you came to be there and what are your financing stories?
Indeed. Yeah, so I joined EVgo last November, so it's been about 11 months, having spent most of my career on the stationary side of clean energy, because so much is happening and is needed to make the transportation sector cleaner. And you're right, energy originally was an idea of the former CEO of NRG, David Crane, in 2010. That's how long EVgo has been around. Some would say that was a pre-dawn idea. It was a very early idea because there weren't very many electric vehicles around in 2010. So in some ways it's been financed by utilities, financed by some public sector money, and now our major shareholder is a private equity fund. So we actually have, an interesting cap table and are continuing to access some public money to do important public policy builds through public-private partnerships, like with the state of Virginia, where we're actually building out the EV charging infrastructure network through the state.
Fantastic, and plenty of EVs out there
Yes.
these days. I'm just realizing we all have something in common, that in some part of our career, and you now, we had public sector experience. So I wonder if that says anything about what it takes to kind of survive here. And you are the most recent, Kiran, departure from the city of Oakland to be a co-founder of Neighborly, but still involved in sort of that municipal finance market. So tell us a little bit about that switch and what hole are you filling in the bond and municipal financing side of the market?
Absolutely. So yes, I was most recently the Chief Resilience Officer for the city of Oakland, and my work was really kind of at the cutting edge of innovative government, de-siloing agencies to really finance resilient communities. And we noticed that you can get the governance, structure figured out, you can figure out the technology, but that financing piece is really kind of where the rubber meets the road. And so with Neighborly, we've built a public finance technology platform that connects communities with capital, taking what we call the original impact investment, the humble municipal bond, the 200-year-old market that has driven the most equitable and resilient outcomes in our communities today, whether they be parks, libraries, schools, the Golden Gate Bridge. And we want to make it more accessible by reducing the transactional costs and bringing the capital closer to the projects.
Well, that is so powerful. I want to come back to kind of the niche that you're filling there, but let's talk with Annie from the Department of Treasury. And we're going to learn about, many of you know what CDFIs are, but some don't, and Annie is the expert on all things CDFI. Just one thing we have in common, way back in the early days of DBL, our original limited partners came from the CRA world, the Community Reinvestment Act. Banks were our major funders in the beginning because we were place-based and paid attention to zip codes and all of that. And no one else would fund us, so it was one of those. But for the CRA and the Treasury and the government, we might not have launched, and who knows what would have happened to us all. So tell us about the CDFI world. It's such a huge pool of funds, and it has a lot of opportunity to expand inclusion and diversity.
Yes,
and then tell us about, I think, one of everyone's favorite incubators is the LA County incubator that you are involved in.
Well, it's funny you talk about public and private experience. I have been a practitioner for most of my life in the community development finance world. I came out of that into the Obama administration to work in the Office of Social Innovation, and then from there jumped over to the Community Development Financial Institutions Fund, the CDFI fund, inside Treasury. So I've been there for 4 years. CDFIs are still, I think, one of the best kept secrets
Maybe tell
out
people
there.
what CDFI stands for.
Yes, so CDFI stands for Community Development Financial Institution. And we certify at the CDFI Fund 1,100 of these organizations that are across the country, and they come in a diversity of forms and sizes. Some of them are regulated banks, some of them are regulated credit unions, they're unregulated loan funds, venture capital funds, nonprofit, for-profit. We don't actually care what your form is as long as you're not a government entity. So these are all private sector entities, and they range in size from 25 million to multiple 5-6 billion. And what brings them together, though, what's common among them is a mission of serving low-income communities and distressed places. So, and we require that 60% of their assets are invested in low-income communities. So that's that's not somebody tinkering around the edges. That's an organization that's committed to community. So when you talk about inclusion and creating a clean economy for all, and equity and inclusion, that's where CDFIs come in and can be tremendously creative and valuable to the work that folks here are concerned about, because they're embedded in those communities. And so, at the CDFI Fund, we run 5 major programs. This past year, we invested about $500 million in financial assistance, as well as bond guarantees. About 150 million of that was bond guarantees for CDFI assets, and then another $3.5 billion invested through the New Markets Tax Credit Program. And so the incubator in Los Angeles, the LA Clean Tech Incubator, is a really good example of what our programs do and what it supports and the kinds of organizations it helps bring together. So that was a $50 million development of a site that had been dark for a long time in a neighborhood of 40% poverty. And so it was the city of Los Angeles through the Los Angeles Development Fund and several CDFIs that came together. They put their tax credits together. They brought in US Bank, and it was a collaborative effort to 43 million of that $50 million facility was financed using the New Markets Tax Credit Program. It's a very powerful tool. And then,
that's a great introduction, and I want to come back to that. I just want to make sure that we're covering all the bases. From your perch at the DOE, you invested in emerging technologies, and energy efficiency, renewables, and there were some dysfunctionalities then, and yet we've seen enormous progress. Now you're kind of at the more commercial scaling stage. Where do you see the dysfunctionalities?
Well, I think that financing writ large, particularly for things that have a public policy objective, is an ecosystem. And so back in those days when I was at the DOE loan program, the capital markets were basically frozen. So the $30 billion that the US government was able to do to support companies across solar and wind and vehicles was sorely needed at that time, and it was able to prove out and give comfort to the private sector capital markets to follow on and do more. And I think the needs of the ecosystem change, over time. I mean, and relative to the maturity of the technologies and stuff. You have been so successful, almost uniquely successful at picking at an early stage and in your venture funds. And hats off to you. And every award that you get is totally deserved, which is fantastic. Where I am now, the company, right, EVgo, we are private equity financed. The market for EVs, as we all know, is absolutely taking off, and private sector money is flowing into that because we're the largest, public infrastructure charging network in the country, and money is excited about backing that essential piece. So again, it depends on where in the stage of development a particular technology is. And we've been around since 2010, so we're pretty mature. The risks are low, so private capital can flow. The first time development or the first technologies, that's going to involve a higher risk tolerance and creativity, and you do that really well in the venture world.
Do you think that there are too many charging station companies, or is there enough for everyone to go around?
Our forecast is that there's going to be, and getting deep into the charging world, we expect that there's going to need to be at least 25,000 fast chargers by 2022, given the ramp up of EVs in this country. So we need to build, like at EVgo, we're building as fast as we can. Because when Elon made his target of the Model 3s last quarter, he proved what could be done, and now the rest of the OEMs are making similar investments. They're not at the same pace, but we're seeing by 2019 and 2020, there's going to be a plethora of EV models. Look, what happened last quarter was an inflection point in the electrification of transportation.
Yeah.
Undoubtedly, and again, hats off to Mr. Musk for leading that charge.
Absolutely. Now, what about, give us some examples of, would you be using bonds to create a network of charging stations in low-income neighborhoods or something like that? Or?
Absolutely. We know that the history of this market is rich, and you've seen what it's created, and we also think that the same tool can be used to finance that 21st century infrastructure that we need to build these resilient communities, whether they be EV charging stations, community solar microgrids, community broadband networks. We really believe that digital infrastructure is where it's at to build that connectivity that we want to see that can help measure what's going on within a community as well. So we're taking, like I said, this very old market and evolving it into this kind of modern time so we can more quickly deploy capital to get these projects built more fast.
Super. And Annie, how do you raise the profile of what you're doing? It's so powerful. You have such resources, great case studies, but I would imagine that most people in this room don't know how to use the tools.
Sure. Well, there's the CDFI Fund website is a good place to start, and also the Opportunity Finance Network website is a really good place as well. Our website is cdfifund.gov. And they have locators. You can look, we have mapping software on there where you can locate where the CDFIs are that are in close proximity to you or that are working in the same geographic areas where you're working. And the OFN website has that as well. But I think one of the reasons we're not better known is because, relatively speaking, our assets under management in the CDFI sector is about 1% of the assets under management just by regulated banks and credit unions in the financial services sector. But what CDFIs really do punch above their weight, and a lot of banks you see now running their programs through CDFIs. So because CDFIs can extend their reach and improve their efficiency in getting to low-income markets, they're channeling their capital there and getting their impact that way.
Small but mighty, and
Yes,
definitely worth
absolutely.
a look. Okay, so we have a few minutes left. I don't know if we have any questions from online. I have a question I want to ask all of you. What is the big misconception about some aspect of financing the clean economy? And what is it? And then dispel that misconception. And I'm going to take the prerogative. I get to have one answer as well. I would say that a misconception about financing the clean economy is that it's just about solar and wind and EVs and charging stations and batteries. It's so much more than that, and there's so much capital flowing to look at the 30% of carbon that comes from food and ag, the role of retail clothing, that less than 1% of clothing is recycled, and so there's a huge carbon load on what we wear to work every day. These companies are making a dent, a significant dent on global warming and climate problems in completely different sectors, and are getting financed from some of the most mainstream names out there. And so I think that's a great source of hope for getting at all of the sectors of the economy and instilling more innovation in those old industries as well. Misconception?
I don't know if this is a misconception, but when I look at the public finance market, there are certain facts that just lend themselves to asking ourselves, can we be doing this differently? So, for example, 80% of the capital that is borrowed by local entities flows through big global banks. $40,000 a minute to middlemen who make these investments in our communities. $4 billion of issuance costs borne by public agencies to get these projects off the ground. And I wonder, if we can change that with technology and change that narrative, then that opens up this market to actually financing a clean economy in a timely manner. I mean, the IPCC report last week kind of threw down the gauntlet, right? We are running out of time. We need to move faster. So how can we all collectively in this room work together to get that done?
I'm going to put a spin on that and say, what's a misconception about lending and investing in low-income distressed communities? And that is that they are creditworthy. And CDFIs have shown this with 25 years of track record, that they lose fewer dollars than regulated institutions in these communities. And so we've put that myth to bed that low-income people and places are not creditworthy. They are.
Good point.
I would say the benefits of blended capital stacks are undersold. So what do I mean by that? I mean that having government public policies underwrite all or part of early stage investments is a good thing, not a weakness of an idea. And having green bonds be part of a capital stack or that is complemented by private equity, that's a good thing. That's not a weakness. So I would just say approaching and again, I'm focused primarily on energy. In the energy sector, it's an essential service, and creative financing that involves different colors of capital is a huge, huge strength that we can bring to bear to get things moving more quickly, because we actually need to get a lot of capital moving more quickly.
Absolutely. I do think that is the secret sauce in a lot of the sort of iconic names that we have in the sector so far, is that they have been successful navigating the different kinds of capital out there. Do we have time for one question?
I think we may not, but I'm going to ask one anyway. So we got a question from Twitter about how significant of an impact are the Trump administration's tariffs on solar panels and steel on building out our nation's energy and transportation infrastructure?
Well, I think they're not as significant as people had feared, but ask my panelists to weigh in.
I can't really comment on that. So I'm not authorized.
Funny that. Correct.
We're with you on that.
I have not felt the impact, but again, I'm not a car maker. I would think that the automakers are probably feeling a bit more of a pinch, but again, they would be better spokespeople for the impact than I.
Yeah, I don't know how the construction costs are being impacted in these infrastructure projects, but I imagine they would have an impact.
What I've heard is that people are able to shift some manufacturing venues and such, and so reduce the severity of the impact. But of course, it's not a good thing for a lot of people, and so we're watching it closely for sure. Well, please give a round of applause to my panelists, and thanks for being with us today.